And they do that for the largest city and so forth. From Joan Youngman, who probably knows as much about the property tax as anybody in the country. She's at the Lincoln Land Institute, which most of what I'm going to show you is from the Lincoln Land Institute, which I like to use because I know they're good, they're reliable, and part of the reason I know is because they paid for half of my support while I went on sabbatical a few years ago. So this one is not from the Lincoln Land Institute, it's from the Tax Foundation, but and this is probably the one exception to what I already said. I know I'm contradicting myself, but you know, economists on the one hand, on the other hand. Property tax paid is a percentage of owner-occupied housing value, and you can see that South Dakota is actually, the light blue here is the lower tax rates, and South Dakota is fairly low, relatively speaking, lower than Nebraska and Iowa. Nebraska really relies heavily on the property tax. So here we go. Of the 50 states, what's South Dakota's rank in property tax? And this is on home values. So not personal property tax, the real estate tax. Where does South Dakota rank? Anybody want to guess? Okay. Anybody else? We're actually 18th. Now, what these are is as it says in the state's largest city. So I listed the cities involved there. So our average rate is about 1.31%. Now it depends on your source. I've seen it as low as 1.01, although that was a mean rather than a median. But the point is that our taxes relative to property taxes in the rest of the country really aren't all that bad, or they're about equal to the national average. So what about the property tax bill? So the number of dollars you pay. And then why wouldn't that be the same? Well, if we're looking at the median home value in each state, South Dakota's home values are, you'd expect, to be lower than the national average, and so that should affect the number of dollars. So we could be ranked higher or lower than in this than we were in the tax rate. Okay, we got A and B. C again. No, they're not all C. I had to choose my states propitiously so that I wouldn't have all of them be the same. So the amount we pay, even though you remember from the previous question, the rank was about the same, the tax rate was about the same to the national average, but the tax amount is quite a bit less than the national average, basically because, one, we're a low tax state, even though some people don't believe that, and two, our housing values are lower. Selected rural. So here's where it really gets to be kind of iffy. The folks who do this particular study, how they choose, I mean, it's easy enough to choose the largest city in the state. How you choose a rural government to ask those questions of is something else. But as it turns out, the rural city that they choose to look at in South Dakota is Vermillion. So I thought I'd show you that. So same sort of question, only we're looking at rural instead of the largest in the state. You know it's not C because I told you that they're not all C. Now, that's quite a bit higher than the one in Sioux Falls. And I haven't had time to really look into why that is, but thinking about it some, it's Vermillion. We probably provide some additional local services. The school district has opted out. I think the county has opted out, haven't they? So that could probably, and I don't think the city, no. But then the city has a sales tax. So I think that probably helps explain why that's quite a bit higher than the Sioux Falls rate. But that's something I'm going to try to look into sometime.
We also have a very high percentage of untaxable property, like the one that we're sitting in right now.
Good point. That's true, right? So here's kind of a comparison of what we were looking at for these particular states. Now, what about 100,000 value commercial property in the largest city? I didn't put in the one for Vermillion. Any guesses? Probably not C. D this time. So notice that compared to the national average, our commercial property isn't taxed as heavily as most commercial property in the country, and my light is fading here. And lower than the surrounding states that I have there. Higher than Wyoming. I don't think Wyoming's not on this one. Wyoming's property tax is incredibly low. It's usually less than 1%. And the reason for that is because they have lots of other sources of revenue like mineral extraction and oil extraction and that sort of thing. So they don't have to depend much on the sales tax. Or the, well, sales tax or the property tax. Whoops. I think I gave it away there. For $1 million value, the other was 100,000. Again, it's D. And I'm getting the message here. So I did throw this in. One thing that we tend to not think about, South Dakota is one of the blue states there that doesn't tax personal property. A lot of states do tax personal property. So for example, if we're talking about commercial, at Walmart, shelves and computers and that sort of thing would count as personal property rather than real property, and a lot of states tax those. And now I'll get out of here.
I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Calista Weisman is a senior medical biology major here at USD. She's also an honors student. She's minoring in math and chemistry. Is that still right? Okay. In addition to that, she's the president of LOL Tutoring for her second year. You've heard Mr. O'Boyle and Mr. Fry talk about the tutors that come into the school. So Calista is kind of in charge of all of that. She also serves on the University Scholarship Committee. She's been a morale captain for Dakotathon. She's won the NOLAP Scholarship and the Nelson Shield Award. So Calista's going to talk about her research that's going to become her honors thesis. I first heard about it about a year ago when we were up in at SDSU at a sort of honors meetup for all of the different programs in the state. And I was really impressed. And I just think it's really great to have students share some of the really great and impactful work that they're doing as undergraduate students here in the honors program. So please welcome Calista.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. I hope you guys can forgive my voice. I'm starting to lose it today. But I am so excited to be presenting this to you all. So, like it says, my research focuses on investigating the relationship between maternal syphilis and clinical sequelae in children, which is just a fancy word for saying that it's developmental malformations. So it's like those defects that you would think of. So how, you're probably wondering, like, how did you get to this topic of research? So I wanted to be a physician. As Melissa said, I'm a pre-med, and so I was trying to discover what exactly, which specialty I wanted to go into. So I had the opportunity to shadow a neonatologist in Sioux Falls at the NICU, and it was such a great experience. It's such a hopeful environment, and I just like really appreciated the hopeful and the welcoming feeling that you get in the NICU. But I just like couldn't help but wonder, how exactly do all of these children get here? Like, what is the leading cause for these children to go into the NICU? What's basically the leading cause of premature babies overall? And so I asked the neonatologist, and she said something quite interesting to me, and she said syphilis. And so that's not like something that you would like normally think of right off the top of your head. So it was, it stuck with me for the rest of the day. And she actually told me that syphilis is on the rise in South Dakota in general. We're like the top leaders in how fast it has been increasing in the recent years. So it stuck with me. I went home and I started researching about exactly like what syphilis is. And I found that it is a sexually transmitted disease, and it is transmitted by a bacterium called Treponema pallidum. And it's like it's a spherical bacterium. It has various symptoms and stages. So adult syphilis isn't cut and dry. You can go through a set of stages as you, after you're infected by this bacterium. The first stage, which happens after infection to about 3 weeks, is your primary stage, and that is characterized by a painless chancre where the bacterium usually enters. And then your secondary stage, which is about 1 to 2 months after. You can get a rash, you can get fever, fatigue, muscle aches, weight loss, hair loss. So as you're like seeing these things, the primary stage usually goes unnoticed, because if it's not painful, if it's not bothering you, like, it goes unnoticed, right? So then you don't get treated. You progress to the secondary phase. You think that you have like a cold. These are kind of common cold or flu symptoms, and it lasts for 1 to 2 months. So it's like, oh, I got rid of it, it's gone, it was just a cold. And then up to a year later, you can go into the latent stage, and that's where you become asymptomatic. And so you don't show any signs or symptoms of having syphilis. And so that's where the problem lies, is this bacterium is very sneaky. It doesn't have very characteristic signs and symptoms that can help you identify exactly like what you have. And so I dug into this more, and I found that using the South Dakota Department of Health, that syphilis rates have actually increased by 90% in South Dakota since 2021. And then congenital syphilis has increased by 150% since 2021. And so congenital syphilis is when the mother transmits the bacterium to their fetus, to their child, either through the placenta or during birth or during breastfeeding. It's usually during pregnancy, though, is when you see that transmission. So this is problematic when these children have this bacterium, because they can develop those developmental malformations. So they start to experience defects like the enlargement of the spleen and liver, jaundice. You got Saber shins, there we go. And then you have your Hutchinson's teeth as well. So your bone malformations, you can get meningitis, and rashes. So these are just like a few that characterize some of these symptoms that the babies experience when they have congenital syphilis. And so it really bugged me, because as I was researching about this, I was able to actually put names to faces to some of these defects that I had just shadowed a neonatologist like that morning of. And I was like, hey, like, I know that baby probably had congenital syphilis because of the symptoms that they were showing and what they were struggling with. And so I went back to school. I just finished my mathematics minor, so I was like, I want to do something that involves math, because I love to do math. And so I talked to Dr. Van Peersum about possibly doing a project combining those two passions that I have, and helping come up with an answer to where we should cater towards in this problem, where we should put our control strategies to. So there my project was born, and we decided we wanted to do a mathematical model to help combine the relationship between maternal syphilis, so adult syphilis, and congenital syphilis, which hasn't been done before in research. And so we chose the SIR model, which is a mathematical model that represents the susceptibles, the infecteds, and the recovereds, and it has parameters in between to get you to those different stages of that sickness. And so over the summer break, as I was digging deeper into this topic and beginning my research, I became ready for a data set. Like, I was ready, I had my SIR model all laid out, and I wanted to implement the numbers to see exactly like where we would fall, where our steady states would be. And so I had the NOLAP Research Scholarship, as Melissa pointed out, so I was able to fund potentially a data set. And what I had found online was a link to the CDC, and it has, notice this graph, the alive signs and symptoms towards the middle. And that's exactly the numbers that I needed to implement into my model. It was the number of children with congenital syphilis that also displayed the clinical malformations. And so I wanted to see where they got that data to make that graph. And so I clicked on the link, but it led to a dead link. And so I emailed the CDC personally, and I notified them about their dead link and inquired about possibly getting the data behind that graph. And about a couple of days later, one of their congenital syphilis surveillance experts reached out to me and asked if he could join my project. So I now am partnering with the CDC to better answer this research question. And what they want me to answer is identifying the parameters in the model that are very sensitive to affecting the number of congenital syphilis cases with those clinical sequelae. So what strategies should we implement that would reduce the proportion of clinical sequelae in the United States the most? That's what my research is focusing on. Where should we focus the control strategies? Would it be more effective to reduce the transmission between the mother to the child? Would it be more effective to reduce the transmission between the father and the mother? Would it be better to make a vaccine? Would it be better to treat the mother's symptoms? Would it be better to treat the child's symptoms? What would be the best to reduce the number of children that are actually experiencing sickness and defects because of this bacterium? So this is the SIR model that I developed. The S is the number of women who are ages 15 through 44, so you're able to conceive, so it's like relevant to our model here. And you can go into the infecteds, the primary, so the first stage, then you can go into the secondary, and you can go into the latent, or L, yes. And then from there, there's two options where a woman can go after being infected. They could either go back into the susceptibles, as you see by epsilon over on the left-hand side, as they still remain sexually active, or they could go to two boxes, and it could be C or it could be L. And what C is that represents the number of children who have the congenital syphilis bacterium. They've tested positive for it, but they don't show any signs and symptoms. And then the L is those who do show those signs and symptoms. So we are using mother-child dyads. We're not adding any extra people into our model. We are just using the number of mothers, but it's describing the clinical outcomes of their children. And so as you can see, I'm going to go back so then it's seen a little bit better. So the epsilon, or sorry, the delta D on the side connecting the C and the L compartments, you can see that because it doesn't always happen right away. So just because you may have gotten the bacterium during pregnancy as a fetus, you may not develop those signs or symptoms until later in life. It can be up to 2 years. And so there's a delayed onset, so that's why it's D. And so going from C to L. So you can also, so because of our model, we are assuming that all of them, once they are tested, so the data that we have are ones that are tested, they are then treated and then they go back, they remain sexually active, they go back into the susceptibles and go all the way around. The mu, which is like the U-looking thing coming off of every single compartment, that's the number of women who are turning 45 that year. So they're, we're assuming that they're no longer able to conceive around that area of their life. So they no longer become significant to our model and they come out. So there are various parameters within it, yes. So there's the beta going from the S to the I, and that's the transmission rate. You've got your IP to IS, which is like your rate of progression, so how likely you are to progress into the next phase. And then coming to C and L, you have the probability of becoming pregnant, right? And then you have the duration of a pregnancy as well. So because people with congenital syphilis, syphilis don't have as long of pregnancies, right? That's why they were in the NICU. They had premature babies, so they're shorter amount of time than what a healthy woman would have. And so that was your rho. And then we have theta as well, which represents the likelihood of them actually contracting the bacterium. And then added on another parameter to go to L is your delta, P, S, and L, depending on which stage they come out of, and that represents the likelihood that they'll be able to display a birth defect or a clinical sequelae. So yeah, that is that part. So I converted all of that information into equations to then put them equal to 0 and find the steady state equilibria for each one, so where they all level out in each stage, and I will show you that in just a second. So I also did Jacobian matrices in both the disease-free and the non-disease-free states, and I analyzed the eigenvalues to determine the stability of the model. There we go. it was just being difficult. So this is the graph. So I coded the differential equations and the numbers that the CDC gave me, those real world numbers of the US, and I put them into Maple and made this graph to represent the steady states where things will level off. So something that's significant from that graph is you'll notice L. In 2030, it is projected that we are going to have almost 800,000 kids with congenital syphilis and those birth defects. And so that is such a high number. And so our work with the CDC is very imperative, especially over the next 6 years. Some of my next steps are to conduct a sensitivity analysis on my parameters. So that means like adjusting things, like just adjusting those variables, those weird Greek letters that were going to the different boxes, adjusting those by 10%, 20%, 30% to see exactly like how it affects the whole thing. And then also just like interpreting, making conclusions, doing my honors thesis. And I'm so honored to have shared this with you all, and if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer. Yes?
I have actually 2 questions. So you said they're 44, turn 45, they drop off, but
Yes.
how about 14-year-olds turning 15?
Yes. Yes, exactly. So that is our R. So that is represented by R, the rate of girls turning 15, and then epsilon is sexual activity. So they have to be both sexually active and at least 15 in order to enter into the susceptibles category.
My second question is, like, is this something, because it seems like it's becoming such a problem, is this something that you would automatically get tested for when you became pregnant?
Yeah, so they actually do have like 3 times when you're pregnant, 3 different points during your pregnancy that you get tested for syphilis. It's just that there are different areas of the US that don't test for it that often. But yeah, the CDC is coming out with recommendations to start testing more frequently because of this. Yeah, yes.
So are there interventions already, like because I know that that's true for some other sexually transmitted diseases, HIV and stuff, but there are interventions that are done with pregnant women to try and reduce the chance of passing on the disease. Does something like that exist for syphilis?
Yeah, they have a treatment. It's penicillin. Same for pregnant women. It's like safe for non-pregnant people and also pregnant women. And so once they take that penicillin, then the syphilis is gone.
So it's just identifying it in time to be able to.
Yeah, exactly. In time for the developmental stage to not be affected. Exactly.
So what happens next with your research?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm presenting to the CDC, hopefully soon, about like my research findings, and that based on like my results and the results that they have been able to collect throughout the years, like coming up with a plan. That's like what their whole purpose is how do we best make the policies? What should our policies be? Who should we test and where and why? And so it's just being a part of the conversation and saying, hey, this is the research, this is what I've found, where we should focus our attention to, and they can take it or leave it. They can decide if like this is something that they want to focus on and implement into their policy.
So is this required? You're a senior, correct? Like you're not in grad school yet.
Correct.
Is this
Yeah.
type of research typical for a senior?
No. I think
She broke my heart when she wasn't a math major. No, this is advanced math at an undergraduate to graduate level mathematics. So she did actually, for a non-math major to be doing a type of equation is very impressive.
She may not be a math major, but it's a major math.
Yeah.
well, I had a great teacher. So yeah.
Say a little more about the intervention. So what stage in the pregnancy is it too late if you find out, or is it never too late? If you get figured out and get penicillin, it takes care of it.
a good question. I actually don't know the exact time, but I do know that it's unpredictable because we can't know when the bacterium was transmitted, if it was before they conceived, if it was during. So it's really hard to tell that point of where it would be critical because we can't tell when exactly the bacterium was given to the fetus. So, but that might be something to look into. Yep. They can have the bacterium but be asymptomatic though. So they can go years without developing those defects. It kind of just depends when the bacterium wants to act up and affect things.
Treating the baby?
There is penicillin, same thing.
Okay.
Yep. But in smaller doses.
It doesn't necessarily undo damage.
Correct. Exactly. Those genetic modifications. Yep. Yes.
This is national data?
Yep. Yep. So the reason why I included the South Dakota stuff was to show you guys it's relevant here. But because I partnered with the CDC, we're working to lower the rates overall in the U.S. So I used United States numbers.
So that 800,000 was
Yes. Yes. U.S. Yep. That was good clarification.
So you'd have to make a lot of assumptions in order to reduce, given what the prevalence rate of syphilis is in the population, to the prevalence rate of syphilis in the population of South Dakota.
Yep.
Doing a hand-waving reference to all of those assumptions, what is about the percentage of syphilis-infected babies in South Dakota?
Percentage, not very high. It is exponentially increasing. I'd have to look again. The CDC just came out a week ago with the new numbers for 2023, and so I just have 2022 right now. But yeah, I'd have to look back into that. But I do know it is a small number, but that number is increasing by 150%, like I was saying before. But yeah, you're right. I have a whole bunch of assumptions that we had to make because of the mathematical model. So, yeah. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate your time.
Calista, thank you so much for that. I find it really fascinating that we get to see firsthand what a USD education. I get that you're kind of an anomaly, but that it's really good to see what our students are learning and how this is going to be a big impact across the United States, I feel. So that's amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, let's see, we didn't have any guests, so Calista, I'm sorry. You are our only guest, so thanks for coming. We'll have our 50-50 drawing, and if you're wondering, I am not Melissa. She had to leave early, so